Hi, I'm Mora. Ever wondered what it feels like to watch your own funeral while you're very much alive? One morning, over a cup of coffee, I found out my parents had staged my death, and somehow, that wasn't even the worst betrayal. What drives a family to bury someone without ever laying them to rest? Before we dive in, have you ever felt erased by the people who were supposed to love you most? Let me know in the comments. The kettle whistled softly behind me as I leaned against the counter, scrolling mindlessly through my notifications. It was supposed to be just another slow morning in Savannah. Gray skies, crisp air, the quiet hum of life going on outside my window. Then my phone buzzed, a new message lighting up the screen. Mrs. Langford. I hadn't heard from her in years. My breath caught before I could even think. Her message was short, clipped. Just a video file, no words. I pressed play with a trembling thumb. The video shook slightly as if taken from under a coat or a trembling hand. But even through the poor quality, I recognized it immediately. St. Albans Church, the one my parents used to drag me to for Christmas services. And there, at the front, two familiar figures stood under the vaulted ceiling. My parents. My mother, dressed in somber black lace, dabbing at non-existent tears with a handkerchief. My father, stiff and grim, clutching a paper so tightly it quivered between his fingers. Behind them, surrounded by flowers and flickering candles, was a casket. And next to the casket, my picture. A large framed portrait of me, smiling in a way that now felt cruelly unfamiliar. My knees buckled slightly, and I clutched the counter to keep myself upright. I watched, disbelieving, as my father began to read. "She was always troubled," he said, voice thick with rehearsed sorrow. "But we loved her. We did everything we could." I stared, frozen. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear his next words. "We pray her soul finally finds peace." It wasn't real. It couldn't be. I was alive, breathing, shaking, watching my own funeral. The camera shifted briefly, catching my mother's face in closer detail, the way her eyes glistened on cue, the slight tilt of her head to appear sorrowful. And then, another blow. As the service continued, my mother took the podium. Her voice was a trembling whisper. "Mora battled mental illness for years. It broke our hearts to see her suffer." I dropped the phone. It clattered against the floor with a hollow clink. Lies, layer upon layer of them. Not only had they buried me, they had rewritten me, rebranded me into a cautionary tale for sympathy points. I slid down the cabinets to the cold tile floor, my head in my hands. Memories rushed back. Heated arguments, slammed doors, endless, suffocating silence. The day they told me to leave. The letters I sent, unanswered. The calls that went straight to voicemail. And now, this. I pressed my forehead against my knees, feeling the heavy, brutal truth settle into my bones. They hadn't just disowned me, they had erased me. I don't know how long I sat there, numb and hollowed out. The video looped on my laptop screen, playing my manufactured death over and over. Each time felt sharper, more jagged than the last. Finally, I pushed myself upright, legs shaking but firm. I stared out the window, the late autumn light casting long, ghostly shadows across the floor. My whisper cut through the silence like a blade. If they wanted me dead, they're about to see just how alive I really am. I crossed the room with new resolve, digging through the dusty old drawers I hadn't opened in years. I pulled out my battered birth certificate, my expired passport, every official proof of my existence I had left. I held the birth certificate in my hands, the paper thin and worn, but still defiantly intact, just like me. The morning they sent me away was colder than I remembered autumn ever feeling. I woke up to the familiar creak of the kitchen floorboards, a smell of burnt toast lingering in the air, and the silence that had stretched thick across the house for weeks. There were no suitcases packed for me, no awkward goodbyes, just a manila envelope sitting dead center on the kitchen table. My mother didn't look up from her coffee as I stepped closer. My father pretended to scroll through his phone. No one said a word. I picked up the envelope, the weight of it unsettling in my hand. Inside, there was no letter, no explanation, just a final water bill, an overdue credit card notice, and a yellow post-it note that simply read, "Handle this." That was it. Years of shared holidays, whispered secrets, and birthday candles, and this was my parting gift. Not even a memory they wanted to hold on to, just debt and a quiet directive to disappear. I stood there for a long moment, waiting for one of them to meet my eye, to crack, to say something that might make this less final. But the house was already colder than the season outside. I packed in silence. Each item that slid into my duffel bag felt like shedding skin that no longer belonged to me. My mother kept wiping invisible crumbs from the counter. My father checked his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. Neither said a word as I zipped up the bag and hoisted it over my shoulder. I hesitated at the door, one last time, but there was no cry to stop me, no arms reaching out. Only the soft snick of the door closing behind me, sealing my exile. The first few weeks blurred together, couch surfing with acquaintances, juggling odd jobs, pretending the world hadn't just shifted beneath my feet. I found a listing for a tiny studio apartment downtown, barely larger than a closet, but it felt like a lifeline, until the call came. "Your application has been denied," the leasing agent said, voice clipped and businesslike. "Your credit report flagged multiple delinquencies." I laughed at first, stunned. Then I felt the blood drain from my face. I hadn't missed a payment in my life. I drove to the office, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I asked to see the report. It was a neatly compiled destruction of my name. Missed payments, closed accounts, red flags I knew I hadn't earned. My parents hadn't just kicked me out. They had continued erasing me, one financial threat at a time. The leasing agent offered me a stiff smile, already glancing toward the next appointment. I stumbled out into the parking lot, the rejection letter crumpled in my hand, and sank onto the cold concrete curb. The sun was setting, casting long, thin shadows across the cracked pavement. I watched them stretch and stretch until it looked like the whole world might snap apart. I sat there until the streetlights flickered on, washing the lot in harsh, lonely light. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my jacket, swallowing the lump that had lodged itself deep in my throat. No matter how deep they buried me, no matter how many lies they planted over my grave, I would not stay dead. I tucked the crumpled letter into my jacket and stood, squaring my shoulders against the night. Some ghosts don't vanish. Some learn how to haunt back. Savannah's air felt heavier that summer, thicker with things unsaid. I tried, in my own quiet way, to stitch myself back into the world. I sent out texts to distant cousins, old family friends, the kind of people who used to pinch my cheeks at barbecues or slip me extra cookies at church events. Most didn't respond. The few who did were polite, distracted. Some asked who I was. It wasn't until I saw the photos that the full weight of it settled over me. Scrolling through social media late one night, illuminated only by the pale glow of my cracked screen, I found album after album of family events, reunions, weddings, backyard 4th of July celebrations, smiling faces I recognized, decorations I once helped hang, and not a single sign I had ever been part of them. I wasn't missing. I was erased. Every memory that once had my laugh tangled in it, my arms around someone's shoulders, my footprint in the backyard mud, scrubbed clean. I closed the app with a shaky breath, but it was already too late. The seed was planted. The next day at the grocery store, I ran into an old neighbor, Mrs. Cranston. I braced for the usual awkward small talk, but her face darkened when she recognized me. "You're back," she said, voice stiff. I smiled, small, unsure. "Just visiting." She shifted uncomfortably, clutching her shopping basket tighter. "Your poor parents. They tried so hard, you know." The words landed like blows I hadn't expected. "I beg your pardon?" Mrs. Cranston sighed, pity and judgment dancing in her eyes. "It's a shame what happened. You running off. All that trouble you caused." I left my cart abandoned in the middle of the aisle, walking out into the thick Savannah air without even checking if I'd grabbed my keys. It wasn't just that they'd abandoned me. It wasn't just that they held a funeral. They told everyone I was beyond saving. The whispers chased me through town. The averted gazes. The hollow, sympathetic smiles that burned hotter than outright cruelty ever could. At a small local art show a week later, desperate to feel like I belonged somewhere again, I smiled at strangers and tried to forget the buzzing in the back of my mind. until I overheard two women by the punch table talking just loud enough. Delilah said she took off. "Drugs, I think," one of them whispered, tossing her hair. "Broke their hearts," said the other. "You can't help someone who doesn't want saving." I didn't stay for the raffle. The next morning, alone at a coffee shop, I scrolled through my phone again, knowing I shouldn't. There it was, a new album, Family Day, my parents standing proud, arms around Delilah, a picnic table sagging under the weight of home-cooked dishes, people I hadn't seen in years, all gathered like nothing had ever fractured. In the middle of it all, Delilah beaming, sun-kissed and glowing. And me? There was no trace I had ever existed, not even a throwaway comment, no wish Mora could be here, no cropped-out images, no tagged ghosts. I stared at the photo until the colors blurred, until the coffee shop sounds faded into a dull buzz. Then I smiled. Small, sharp. You can erase my picture, you can delete my name, but you can't erase me. The world has a way of teaching you that grief doesn't always come in tears. Sometimes it comes in bank statements. I was sitting at the worn desk in my tiny apartment, balancing freelance invoices, when I decided it was finally time to check the old account. Maybe there was a scrap of stability left, something I could salvage. Typing in my old credentials felt like unlocking a part of myself I had tried to forget. For a brief moment, I allowed myself a sliver of hope. Access denied. I tried again, slower this time, triple-checking every keystroke. The same message blinked coldly on the screen. Your account has been closed. The words didn't register at first. I sat there staring, the cursor pulsing like a heartbeat on life support. When I called the customer service line, the hold music was nauseatingly cheerful. I kept thinking there had to be some mistake, a clerical error, a glitch, but there wasn't. The voice on the other end was professional, detached. Your account was closed per the request of the co-holder, Mr. Victor Maddox, she said. Victor, my father. And the remaining funds, she continued, were dispersed for memorial-related expenses. Memorial. For me. The words knocked the breath from my lungs. I drove to the bank in a daze, gravel crunching beneath tires I barely remembered steering. The banker met me with a tight smile, already bracing for the fallout she must have seen before. "I'm sorry," she said. "The funds were withdrawn months ago. Documentation sites, memorial services." I managed a nod, throat too tight to speak. Outside, the humid savanna air wrapped around me like a noose. I found a sliver of shade by the building and collapsed onto the curb. It wasn't just about the money. It was the nights I spent double shifting at diners, the textbooks I couldn't afford, the missed meals, all those sacrifices, all those dreams, gone, liquidated to pay for a lie. I hugged my knees to my chest, trying to breathe past the heaviness sitting on my sternum. Somewhere inside, a voice was screaming, "They didn't just take your past, they are buying your death with your own future." By the time I stumbled back to my apartment, night had fallen hard. I opened my laptop to distract myself, to remind myself I still had things to do, invoices to send. One new email notification blinked in the corner. Subject, "Condolences on your loss." It was from the bank. An auto-generated message expressing sympathy for my passing, sent to the email I still used every single day. I read it once, twice, the surreal cruelty of it slicing deeper each time. Slowly, deliberately, I closed the laptop. The rage that had been simmering under my devastation didn't explode. It crystallized. I wasn't dead. I wasn't lost. I wasn't buried. They had no idea what I still had left. The sidewalk cracked under my sneakers as I walked past the old neighborhood, pretending I had someplace to be. The truth was simpler. I was searching for something I wasn't sure I'd find. Closure, maybe. Or proof that the past hadn't been a fever dream. I hadn't planned to stop. I told myself it would hurt too much. But my feet slowed as the house came into view, framed by the skeletal branches of winter trees. It looked smaller than I remembered, shabbier. Still, my heart hammered against my ribs. I stayed across the street at first, studying it from a distance like a cautious animal. And then I saw it. My old bedroom window, where I used to press my face against the glass during summer thunderstorms, counting seconds between lightning and thunder, was gone, bricked over, painted the same bland beige as the rest of the house, as if that room had never existed at all. I crossed the street before I realized what I was doing, my pulse roaring in my ears. The closer I got, the more details surfaced, each one a deeper cut. The dogwood tree I planted with my father when I was 10 was gone. In its place sat a neat circle of decorative stones, sterile and impersonal. No roots, no memory, just a curated lie. I found a spot along the fence where I could peer inside. New photo frames lined the walls of the living room. Shiny, coordinated, perfect, all filled with Delilah's smiling face. Graduations, birthdays, vacations. Mom and Dad flanking her, beaming. Not one frame held a memory of me. It wasn't just erasure. It was a rewriting. They hadn't simply cut me out of their lives. They had redesigned them so I had never been there to begin with. The realization hit me harder than any insult, sharper than any door slammed in anger. I stumbled back from the fence, sitting down hard on the curb, gravel biting into my palms. I remembered Christmas mornings around that fake tree they used to put up, the way the living room smelled like cinnamon and burnt coffee, the paper crowns we wore from dollar store crackers. Had I dreamed it all? Had I ever been real here? The cold seeped into my jeans, but I couldn't make myself move. The past felt like smoke in my hands, something I thought I could cling to, but that slipped through my fingers no matter how tight I squeezed. When the shaking subsided, I noticed a small leaf lying near my shoe. It was dry and brown, likely blown from some surviving tree down the block. But I picked it up anyway, held it between my fingers like something sacred. "You erased me once," I whispered, my voice steady even as my heart cracked open. "Let's see you erase what's coming." I didn't look back at the house. I didn't need to. The only history that mattered now was the one I was about to write myself. The envelope looked ordinary when I pulled it from the mailbox, nestled between junk flyers and late credit card offers. But something in my chest tightened as soon as I saw the return address stamped in neat, impersonal ink. Savannah County Property Office. Inside was a notice about unpaid taxes on a property. My property, the house I had grown up in, the house that had bricked over my bedroom window and replaced my memories with decorative stones. Confused, I checked the parcel number 3 times. There must have been a mistake. I hadn't lived there for years. I hadn't set foot inside since they erased me from it. I went online, pulling up the property records. The knot in my stomach unraveled into freefall. There it was in black and white, title transferred. Not to me, not jointly, sold. The buyers, Victor Maddox and Corinne Maddox, listed as sellers. The new owner listed simply as Delilah Maddox. A clean legal transaction. Paperwork processed, funds wired, all done without a whisper of my consent. I scrolled back, checking the timeline. The sale had been finalized months ago, right around the time I received the condolence email from the bank. They hadn't just frozen me out. They hadn't just rewritten me. They had stolen the bones of my life and handed them over like some consolation prize to the daughter who stayed loyal to the myth. The betrayal hit harder than the financial loss ever could. It wasn't about money. It was about trust, about roots, about the idea that no matter how rocky the family road became, there would still be a piece of ground, of home, that was mine. But they had ripped even that away. I sat on the sagging mattress in my rented room, legal papers and printed screenshots spread out around me like a storm, notes scribbled in the margins, timelines built from memory and grief. It was stunning, really, when you laid it all out, the slow, methodical erasure of a person. They hadn't needed violence, just paperwork, just signatures and silence. I thought about all the hours I spent pulling weeds in that yard as a kid, painting the porch railing, helping my dad haul firewood through brutal Savannah winters. Turns out, loyalty isn't thicker than inheritance documents. The lamp on my bedside table buzzed and flickered overhead as I gathered the documents into a neat pile. I clipped them together and slid them into an old folder, one that had once held college applications and summer camp certificates. I grabbed a Sharpie from the drawer and scrawled across the front, "Legal action. Evidence." It was sloppy, it was angry, it was real. I sat back against the headboard, holding the folder against my chest like a shield. "You thought you buried me," I whispered into the empty room, the words tasting like iron. "You forgot, I know how to dig." The email arrived without warning, slipping into my inbox like a stray bullet. I sat at the small table in my rental, surrounded by half-sorted legal papers and coffee cups stained with too many sleepless nights. I almost didn't open it. Part of me was tired of surprises, tired of new ways to be broken. But the sender's name froze me mid-sip. Mrs. Langford. My hands trembled slightly as I clicked the message open. No subject line, no pleasantries. Just a short note. "You deserve to know the truth." And an attachment. I pressed play. The video was shaky, as if filmed from behind a purse or coat sleeve. But it didn't matter. I knew those faces better than anyone. My parents, standing solemnly at the front of St. Albans Church, the heavy oak casket, the flowers arranged in carefully orchestrated grief, my photograph smiling back at a congregation gathered to mourn a death that had never happened. My stomach twisted, but my mind sharpened, slicing through the fog like a blade. I watched my father speak about forgiveness and redemption. I watched my mother clutch a handkerchief, dabbing at dry eyes. I watched the way Delilah accepted hugs, murmuring into sympathetic shoulders, her face a perfect mask of fragile strength. This wasn't grief. This was theater. And they had sold my life as the cost of the admission ticket. I closed the video, my breathing shallow. The message continued. "I wanted to speak up," Mrs. Langford wrote. "But your mother told us you were unstable, dangerous. She warned us to stay away." The words burned hotter than any flame. Dangerous, unstable. How neatly it tied everything together. The avoidance, the whispers, the sideways glances. It hadn't been silence by accident. It had been orchestrated. They hadn't just cut me out of their lives. They had poisoned the soil so nothing with my name could ever grow again. I leaned back in my chair, staring up at the cracked ceiling. Isolation had always felt like a slow drowning, but now I realized it had been a carefully built prison, brick by brick, story by story. And I was done waiting inside it. I pulled the stack of printed screenshots from the corner of the table, pinning them one by one to the peeling wallpaper. Emails, photos, property transfers, hospital bills I had never authorized, false reports filed in my name. Each piece of evidence a nail in the coffin they had built, not for me, but for the lies they thought would bury me. I stood back, surveying the wall. It looked messy, chaotic. It looked real. "You wanted a ghost," I said aloud, my voice steady. "You're about to get one." I closed my laptop with a decisive snap, the sound echoing louder than it should have in the small, battered room. The call came just after sunrise, when the world was still soft and unfinished. Victor's voice crackled through the line, cold and stripped of anything human. "Don't come," he said. "Let it go." The words landed like pebbles on water, rippling, sinking, gone. He hung up before I could respond, before I could remind him that there was nothing left to let go of. Later, the knock at the door barely registered. I found a plain envelope slipped under the threshold, no return address. Inside, a single slip of paper, ink sharp and angry. "If you show up, you'll regret it." I turned the note over, studying the slight tilt of the letters, the way certain words pressed harder into the page. My mother's handwriting. Of course. Fear sparked briefly under my skin, but it died quickly, smothered by something heavier, determination, a kind of final, unmovable rage. I didn't rush. I dressed carefully, simple black dress, hair pulled back, flats comfortable enough for standing, but plain enough not to draw more attention than necessary. My proof sat heavy in my bag. The birth certificate, the property records, the emails, the banking fraud notices. Pieces of my life they thought they could steal. Savannah's streets blurred past the car window as I drove, the air thick and damp with the weight of coming rain. St. Albans loomed ahead, just as hollow and grand as I remembered. Cars lined the lot. Umbrellas blossomed along the walkway. Inside, the service was already underway. I pushed open the heavy oak doors without hesitation, stepping into the scent of old wood, lilies, and sanctimonious grief. The priest was mid-sentence, voice solemn as he spoke of my battles, my suffering, my tragic end. A ripple moved through the congregation as people turned, recognizing me. Or rather, recognizing the impossibility of me. I walked slowly down the center aisle, past rows of faces frozen in various shades of horror and confusion. Corinne sat in the front pew, handkerchief clutched dramatically against her mouth. Victor stared at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. Delilah, draped in tasteful mourning black, caught my gaze, and for the first time, faltered. I reached the altar and turned to face them all. I pulled the stack of documents from my bag and placed them firmly on the pulpit. "My name is Mora Avery," I said, my voice steady, slicing through the heavy silence. "I am alive. You lied." Gasps broke the room's stillness like glass shattering on marble. Corinne swayed theatrically and sank into Victor's arms. He caught her reflexively, but his face was a pale, crumbling mask. I stepped aside, letting them all absorb it, their betrayal laid bare under the cruel light of truth. I turned back toward the pews, locking eyes with Delilah. Her smirk, the one she had perfected over years of my erasure, cracked cleanly down the middle. For the first time she looked afraid, and I smiled. "You buried me alive," I said quietly, voice carrying without effort. "Now watch me live." The church doors slammed shut behind me, muffling the uproar inside. The cool air outside tasted cleaner than anything I'd breathed in years. I stood on the cracked steps of St. Albans, shoulders squared, the old document still clutched in my hands. For a moment, it didn't matter that people were whispering behind stained glass, or that someone inside was already calling a lawyer. For the first time, I was no one's secret, no one's shame. I was just Mora. The news traveled faster than I expected. Savannah wasn't the kind of town that lets scandals sit quietly. By evening, social media was already buzzing with snippets from the funeral. Comments flooded under grainy videos. "Isn't that the daughter they said died? Lied to an entire congregation? Someone's going to jail." Most people didn't reach out. Some crossed the street when they saw me coming. Some offered half-hearted smiles, heavy with pity. It didn't matter. I wasn't here to be understood anymore. The real victory wasn't in clearing my name for them. It was in claiming it back for myself. The city began moving against Corinne and Victor in slow, grinding gears. Legal notices arrived at their house. Investigators poked into the property transfers. Questions were asked that couldn't be answered with teary smiles or staged grief. Meanwhile, I found a new place across town. A tiny apartment, bare walls, a leaky faucet, a stubborn front door. But it was mine. Signed in my own name, with my own money, no co-signers, no shadows. I bought a used chair, a small desk, planted a few potted herbs in the windowsill. It wasn't much, but it was honest. One evening, carrying groceries up the steps, I paused and looked at my new key in the lock. No one else's hand had touched it before me. No one else's name was on the lease. It was a small thing, but it was everything. A week later, I drove back to the old neighborhood. Not to the house. I didn't need to see the bricked-up window or the empty porch again. Instead, I stopped at the place where the dogwood tree once stood. Only a stump remained now, gray and hollowed. I knelt beside it and planted a small sapling. Not because I wanted the past back, but because some things deserve to grow again. The earth was hard, stubborn, but so was I. As I packed up the soil, wiping dirt from my jeans, a movement caught my eye across the street. A figure stood half hidden behind a tree, watching. I didn't need a second look to know it was Delilah. She stayed back, uncertain now, her power drained, maybe wondering if she was next. Maybe realizing that the version of me she helped erase had been replaced with something stronger, sharper. I smiled at her, not in anger, not in triumph, just in peace. I turned back to the sapling, patting the earth into place around its thin, trembling trunk. This time, the only story they'll write about me is the one I tell. Maybe the hardest truth I had to learn is that sometimes family isn't the people who gave you life. It's the people who honor your life. It's the choices you make every day to protect your peace, even if that means walking away from the ones who built you. Healing isn't clean. It's messy. It's complicated. And it often comes without apologies or closure. But survival? Survival is choosing yourself even when they don't. I wonder, Have you ever had to rebuild yourself from nothing? If you have, I'd love to hear your story. What did it teach you about strength, about forgiveness, about freedom? If this story touched your heart even a little, drop a 1 inch in the comments or share where you're tuning in from. If it didn't resonate with you, tell me why. I genuinely want to know. And if you enjoy real stories about resilience, hope, and rebuilding, please subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world and helps keep these stories alive.